A common question that I hear is, why is my horse's head so high? Why does he move this way? Why is his head in the air? And there's three main reasons why a horse will move with a really high head. Now, I just want to be really clear that what I'm referring to, and most of the time the horses that I see being referenced in these questions that I get, are horses that are moving hollow. And that means that the horse's head is up and their back is also dropped. So they're moving in a hollow way as opposed to a round frame, which would be a horse that appears more round over their top line. So in today's video, I want to share the three main reasons that I see why horses have this really high head carriage. I'm Callie. This is my weekly video show here at CRK Training. This is my horse Noelle, and today I just wanted to help answer this question by talking through these three common reasons that I see why horses have a really high head carriage and a hollow frame. So the first reason that a horse will lift his head up and go into this kind of a posture is if he's feeling anxious. So if he's anxious, if he's afraid, or if he's in adrenaline, horse will go into this kind of a posture. It's an alert stance. If you see a horse in the field that's gotten startled by something, they go into this kind of a posture. And the same thing happens when we're riding. The horse starts to get anxious, they'll tend to get more tense, and that puts them into this more high head, hollow back posture. The other thing that can happen is if the horse is uncomfortable. So if the horse is having back pain, if the saddle doesn't fit well, if something's uncomfortable, once again, we see the horse tensing in an effort to get away from that pain. And sometimes it might be pain somewhere else. Sometimes it's literally the horse moving in a way to try to avoid, say, a pressure point from the saddle. And the third reason is that the horse simply doesn't understand how to adopt this posture. So the rider doesn't have a way to ask for it. The horse doesn't understand to go into this posture, and it's just a habit for the horse to carry himself in more of this, again, high head, hollow back posture. So if we think about horses out in the field, they don't necessarily need to have a round frame and be in this weight-bearing type of stance. When we get on the horse's back and we add weight, then we need to teach them to carry themselves in order to best manage our weight so that they can move comfortably, they can move efficiently, and also that they stay sound and they reduce or limit the stress on all the joints that would come from the poor movement. So I'm going to just show you a few things riding here that even the rider can do that changes the horse's movement. Now, Noelle's calm at the moment, so she's not going to have adrenaline or fear that's going to cause her to lift her head and go into that posture right now. And her saddle fits pretty well. She doesn't have pain that I know of, but I could still make her uncomfortable and make her go into this high-headed position if I changed some things with my riding that actually made her uncomfortable. So, for example, if I brace in my heel, I have to first kind of force her to keep going, but if I brace in my heel and let my weight come towards the back of the saddle, you can tell that right away her head goes up and she gets hollow. It might not be as exaggerated as with some horses, but it happens nonetheless. Same thing would happen if I started posting really heavy off the back of the saddle. Now she got uncomfortable, she slowed down, her head came up. When I allowed her to get comfortable again, she stretched forward into this position. Now we can see that third reason, habit, and not quite understanding how to move in this way for Noelle in her transitions. So when I ask her to do a downward transition into walk, I might have to work at it a little bit. So right there, she didn't raise her head, but she got a little hollow through her back. There she lifted her head and got hollow through her back. Now I'm going to ask again. And I might need to try this just a few times where we start to go low, start to slow down. If I feel her start to hollow, I ask her to move forward again. I'm using a touch of my whip to ask her to move forward. And then we get a walk transition that is far from perfect, but she was able to do the transition with a little better balance than if I'd had her transition down to walk when she was starting to lift her head and get hollow. So you saw as I was riding her that we were able to look at those two examples. I made Noelle uncomfortable by changing the way that I was riding her, putting a lot of weight on the back of the saddle, limiting her head with a stiff hand, or bracing my heels, and therefore not going forward freely with her. She got uncomfortable, and she lifted her head, and she hollowed her back. And then in the transition, we were able to see where that third reason, where Noelle's habit came out, and she's used to, in those transitions, getting hollow. So I had to work a little bit in order to help her find the transition that she could move through it without just lifting her head and getting really hollow. So if you have a horse at home that you've noticed seems to be really high-headed all the time, start by just going through and first think about, is he mentally comfortable? So is he anxious about something? Is he fearful? Could you work somewhere where he could be calmer and work on teaching him to lower his head first from the ground and then from the saddle? And then also, is there something that's causing him pain? Is he uncomfortable? Does the saddle fit well? Are you riding him in a way that allows him to be able to move with this forward stretch with the head and neck and the lifted back? And then finally, for even little parts of your training, like in the transition for her, what could you work on to help your horse better improve the way that he carries himself? If you're thinking now about your horse at home that maybe tends to be a little bit high-headed, the first step is to make sure that he's comfortable enough to drop his head and neck and move in this better position. So does he have pain somewhere? Does the saddle fit well? And also, are you riding him in a way that allows him to move more comfortably? So you saw when I was riding Noelle, it sometimes wasn't even a big change, but when I would go towards the back of the saddle or I would brace in my leg, it would make it uncomfortable for her to continue moving in that more round frame, and then she would pop her head up and hollow her back. So you want to make sure that the horse is comfortable and that you're not accidentally getting in his way when you're riding him. The second thing to think about is he anxious or fearful? And I'm going to post a link to an article that I wrote down below, because there is really a connection between how the horse feels, his emotional state, and also how the horse carries himself. But if you're noticing this high-headedness in a specific environment or around certain locations, so for example, say there's one area of the arena that he just gets freaked out in and he goes really high-headed all the time when he's there, then you want to think about how could you make him be calmer in that area, in that situation, or with that thing around him. And then finally, the next thing to think about is, does he understand how to actually move in this way and how to have this, neck stretching forward and down, back lifted, so that he can comfortably carry the weight of a rider. So that's part of the basic training of a horse, and sometimes it gets skipped, or if the horse hasn't been ridden for a while, he needs to kind of redevelop some of the strength to be able to keep this posture for gradually longer and longer periods of time. Now, we could go into we could go a lot further in kind of each area of this. So we could talk a lot about saddle fitting. We could talk about how you actually train the horse to have a cue so that you can ask them to drop their head. But I've got more resources for you, both here at the blog and also in my premium online courses about that. But just make sure that your horse understands what you're asking for. I like to start teaching this from the ground first, making sure that the horse is soft to the bit, that he is understanding of what rein cues, what bit pressure or bridle pressure, if you're using a halter or a bitless bridle, what it means, that he can move with his head and neck low from the ground, and then you can transfer that training to the saddle. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love for you to leave me a comment and just tell me if you have a horse at home that tends to get high-headed, after watching this video, what do you think is the main reason for your horse? So go ahead and put that in the comments. If you're watching this anywhere besides crktrainingblog.com, go there. We'll have the extra article that you can read there, and I've got lots of other resources there on my website as well.